Have you ever, tried to sit down and map out the absolute ultimate end game of artificial intelligence and robotics?
Oh, that's a massive question.
Right. But I mean, not just the short-term stuff, not just market caps or which jobs are disrupted next year.
You mean looking at the fundamental architecture of human civilization itself?
Exactly. Like if you run the simulation all the way to its logical conclusion, what actually happens to the very concept of the nation state?
It's basically the geopolitical blind spot of our entire era. The discourse right now is just completely saturated with these near-term anxieties.
Yeah, like quarterly earnings or copyright lawsuits.
Right. Immediate labor shifts. We almost never push the timeline forward to examine how a true localized intelligence explosion just completely rewrites the social contract.
It's wild because technology isn't just adding a new tool to the existing structure.
No, not at all. It's actually threatening to dissolve the foundational premise that the structure was built on in the first place.
Yeah. Which brings us perfectly to the source material we are unpacking in this deep dive. We're looking at a fascinating essay from June 2026.
A really remarkable piece of analysis.
Yeah, it's titled Barakface, AI and Robotics, The Ultimate Path to Radical Government Shrinkage. It's by an author named Paramendra. And before we get into the heavy economic theory here, there's this striking detail about the author's background.
The contrast is amazing, honestly.
It really is. Paramendra notes that he was actually Barack Obama's first full-time volunteer in New York City.
Wow.
So we're looking at a forecast that maps out the total atrophy of the administrative state, but it's written by someone whose roots are deeply embedded in progressive grassroots organizing.
And that background, it acts as a really crucial filter for how we read this text.
How so?
Well, when someone with a solid history in progressive politics arrives at a conclusion that sounds, frankly, akin to radical anarcho-capitalism.
Or hyper-libertarianism, right?
Exactly. It indicates that the underlying logic isn't driven by standard ideological partisanship. The essay suggests that the physics of automation are just, going to override traditional political philosophy completely.
I think I want to pause right here just to set a really firm parameter for you, the listener.
Good idea.
Because the source material we're dissecting today, it absolutely touches the third rail of both left-wing progressivism and right-wing conservatism.
It really dismantles everyone's sacred cows.
It does. It dismantles core tenets of the expansive welfare state, but simultaneously it renders traditional conservative austerity arguments completely moot. So our role here today is entirely impartial.
We are just the messengers.
Exactly. We are not endorsing the author's political endgame, and we aren't taking sides in the broader ideological debate. Our mission is just to strip this down to the studs, examine the economic mechanics the author proposes, and really stress test the logic.
Let's start with the foundational premise of the essay then, because to understand this, we have to completely reframe how we view the current iteration of government.
Right. Why does it even exist in its current form?
The author argues that the sprawling apparatus of the modern state, the massive administrative bureaucracies, the complex regulatory bodies.
The vast entitlement systems?
Yeah. They don't exist because humans just inherently love bureaucracy. They exist as a necessary, albeit super inefficient, mechanism for managing scarcity.
Okay, managing scarcity. Let's unpack that. It's like the current government is essentially an incredibly complex rationing board.
A rationing board during wartime, almost.
Yeah, because we live in a world governed by the laws of thermodynamics.
Yeah.
Energy, matter, human labor, they're all finite. And because they're finite, you have to allocate them.
And allocating resources across 300 million people requires immense administrative overhead.
Yeah.
Because human processing power and bandwidth are incredibly limited.
So you need a massive bureaucracy just to make sure everyone gets a slice of the pie.
Exactly. Think about the sheer transaction costs involved in maintaining that system. When resources are scarce, the market inevitably produces externalities.
And failures that the state has to step in and fix.
Right. You need armies of tax auditors to ensure revenue collection. You need vast departments of education and health, sprawling regulatory agencies.
So the author views all this bloat as basically a technological workaround, a workaround for human limitations in a mathematically scarce environment.
It's an incredibly costly social insurance policy.
Yeah.
That's what the state is right now.
But then the author introduces a completely different variable into the equation. The text asserts that AI and advanced robotics are fundamentally, quote, tools of abundance.
Yes, governed by physics, code, and incentives. rather than ideology.
Which is a massive shift, because if you achieve generalized intelligence and you integrate it with like highly dexterous, autonomous physical robots,
You are attacking that scarcity variable directly.
right, you're taking the rationing board and throwing it out the window, because what happens to the rationing board when a machine can print bread out of thin air?
That's the crux of the whole argument, the transition from political philosophy to applied physics.
It's mind-blowing when you really think about it.
It is. If a civilization reaches a point where productive capacity is effectively decoupled from human biological limitations, the entire rationale for the administrative state collapses.
Because if you eliminate the scarcity of production, the complex machinery built to manage that scarcity just becomes vestigial. It's like an appendix.
Exactly. And the implication for modern politics is staggering. I mean, think about it. Almost every policy debate today operates within a zero-sum framework of trade-offs.
Oh, totally. Like, expanding healthcare access means you have to increase taxes on a specific bracket, or you have to pull funding away from infrastructure.
Right. The author is forcing us to consider the macroeconomic physics of a society where those trade-offs simply evaporate.
Because of effectively infinite non-human productive capacity.
Yes, it attacks the very necessity of coercive redistribution.
Right, because the programs we have today, they were designed for the industrial economics of the 20th century.
Programs built on the assumption of fixed labor output and scarce capital.
And the author is saying those become totally obsolete when abundance is generated and distributed through highly efficient decentralized AI networks. The friction of the state just isn't needed anymore to move the gears of society.
We really need to define the mechanics of this abundance, though, because the author uses a very specific economic term here, the near-zero marginal cost society.
Yeah, let's dig into that, because it's one thing to casually say, oh, robots make things cheaper, but it's something else entirely to grasp the macroeconomic impact.
Exactly. What happens when the cost to produce one additional unit of food or housing or energy asymptotes toward absolute zero for massive populations?
Well, we've seen near zero marginal cost in digital goods for decades, right? I mean, it costs basically nothing to copy a software program or stream a movie to one more user.
Spot on. And what Paramendra is outlining is the translation of that digital economic reality into the physical world.
So a mature robotics economy applies those same zero marginal cost dynamics to the physical atoms we literally need to survive.
Yes. But the historical context the author provides is critical here to understand the scale.
Right, because critics always point to the past. They say, well, we had the steam engine, electrification, early computing. Those are massive productivity gains.
But the author insists this is different. Those past technologies were mere multipliers of human labor.
You still needed a human in the loop.
Exactly. A mechanized loom or a combustion engine requires human operation, maintenance, and oversight. They are static technologies. They don't improve unless a human engineer redesigns them.
But the author highlights that autonomous AI systems are completely different. They engage in continuous self-improvement.
They operate 24 hours a day without fatigue, and they execute with molecular precision.
So you have capital that not only replaces labor, but actively optimizes its own code and physical operations in real time.
And that completely severs the link between human physical endurance and economic output.
I want to ask you about this because I find the psychological implications of this shift almost more profound than the economic ones.
Oh, absolutely. It changes the human condition.
The text makes this fascinating pivot. The author says that poverty becomes primarily a, quote, distribution or motivation issue rather than a production one.
That is a massive paradigm shift.
It is. How does that redefine our understanding of human struggle? Are we even prepared for a world where producing enough to survive is no longer the main challenge?
It redefines the very nature of human suffering. Historically, the constraint on human flourishing has been the harsh reality of nature, the limits of agricultural yield.
Just fighting the elements to get enough calories.
Right. But if that constraint shifts to just being about the internal motivation of the individual or the localized distribution algorithms of the society,
the entire moral calculus of poverty changes.
it moves from being an engineering and production failure to a purely sociological phenomenon.
I really want you, the listener, to put yourself in that position for a moment. Just imagine your own life.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
It is. If the fundamental baseline of your existence, your shelter, your nutrition, your basic medical diagnostics, your energy consumption, what if securing all of that required absolutely zero labor input from you?
The architecture of human motivation has to be completely rebuilt from the ground up.
We've built entire civilizations around the anxiety of deprivation. If you remove that, the pressure that drives the daily machinations of society just dissipates.
And that dissipation directly impacts the massive labor force currently propping up the state, which leads us into the next phase of the essay.
Right, the atrophy of the bureaucracy.
Exactly. The author moves from the macroeconomics of abundance to the micro-level reality of what happens to government jobs.
The text points an unflinching spotlight at the sheer volume of human capital currently trapped in administrative roles within the government.
We are talking about millions of human hours dedicated solely to friction management.
Tax compliance, auditing, processing entitlement claims.
Even just managing the internal bureaucracy of agencies that oversee other agencies.
It's a labyrinth. And the author argues that this entire layer of the economy is incredibly brittle. It's highly susceptible to total automation.
The text outlines very specific vectors for this automation, too. Take regulatory agencies, for example.
Right. How does an AI replace a health inspector or an environmental regulator?
The author envisions a transition from human inspectors performing sporadic, localized audits to systemic, predictive enforcement and smart contracts.
Let's walk through the mechanics of that because it's a huge shift. Currently, environmental regulation requires an inspector to physically visit a factory.
They measure emissions, file a report, go through a lengthy compliance review,
And then maybe issue a fine months later. It's so slow.
But the author is describing an integration of IoT sensors directly tied to cryptographic smart contracts.
So if the sensor detects a chemical spike above a legally coded threshold,
The smart contract automatically executes a financial penalty against the corporation's digital wallet in real time.
wow. The human regulatory apparatus is completely bypassed by deterministic code. It's instant enforcement.
And that same disintermediation applies to sectors like education and healthcare administration.
The essay specifically mentions personalized AI tutors
Yeah.
and robotic care, right?
Yes, but not just as tools to assist teachers and doctors. The text frames them as systems that fundamentally hollow out the massive administrative bloat that suffocates those industries right now.
Because when diagnostics and customized pedagogy are handled at the algorithmic level, you don't need sprawling district administrations.
Or massive hospital billing departments with thousands of employees just arguing with insurance companies. It just vanishes.
It's kind of like the shift from switchboard operators to digital networks.
That's a perfect analogy.
Right. You used to have hundreds of operators manually plugging in cables to connect phone calls. Now, a single automated digital network does it instantly in the background.
And the essay even targets the core monopoly of the state, defense and policing.
Right. The author suggests autonomous systems will drive radical efficiency gains in security, drastically shrinking the personnel footprint required to project force.
But I think the transition in infrastructure planning is perhaps the most fascinating example the author gives.
Oh, the political log rolling part, yes.
Currently, physical infrastructure is dictated by human-driven inefficiency, pork barrel spending, chaotic town halls, decades of environmental impact reviews.
Politicians fighting over where to build a bridge just to win votes.
Exactly. The author suggests replacing that entire political circus with simulation.
So moving away from what they call a cohesion bargaining model, where stakeholders fight in committee meetings, to generative design and Monte Carlo simulations.
And AI just ingests real-time traffic data, geological surveys, supply chain logistics, and environmental metrics.
And it outputs the mathematically optimal bridge design and location. The decision is stripped of its political nature entirely. It's just cold, hard physics and computation.
But this naturally leads to a huge boundary condition in the author's argument.
Yeah, the big question, if algorithms are managing the physical infrastructure, enforcing the regulations, and administering healthcare, is there any government left at all?
The author doesn't argue for pure anarchy. Instead, they define what they call the residual state, or the minimalist referee.
The government transitions from being this comprehensive provider and manager to just a minimalist referee and coordinator.
Right. The text delineates three irreducible functions that even a hyper-advanced algorithmic society needs a central authority to manage.
The first one is handling genuine externalities that decentralized markets or AI networks struggle with, like planetary-scale climate engineering.
Or mitigating existential technological risks. You still need a central node for that. The second irreducible function is the fundamental prevention of force and fraud.
Makes sense. But the third function is really where the essay gets wild. defining property rights in entirely new domains.
As physical scarcity plummets, the friction points of the economy shift. The text specifically highlights data, AI models, and orbital resources.
Those are the new frontiers of property law. Imagine a government whose main job is figuring out who owns the data that trained an AI.
Or assigning mining rights to a near-Earth asteroid.
It's a massive implication. The complexity of governance shifts entirely away from managing human-to-human welfare friction.
It moves toward managing massive, non-human capital assets and their interactions in space and cyberspace.
But the author mentions something here that I really want to push back on: the dispute resolution mechanism for this residual state.
Ah, yes, the AI arbitrators.
Right. The text talks about deploying AI arbitrators with perfect recall of law and precedent.
It's a controversial point for sure.
I mean, does perfect recall of the law equal perfect justice? I have to challenge that underlying assumption.
It's the crisis of algorithmic literalism.
Exactly. Legal precedent isn't just a pure mathematical vector. It's a continuously evolving interpretation of human intent, societal norms, and context.
The author assumes that law is ultimately reducible to code.
But the gray areas of human disputes usually require human empathy. If an AI referee perfectly executes the letter of the law, how does it handle a novel situation where rigid adherence actually produces a deeply unjust outcome?
An AI might lack the flexibility that justice requires. And without that flexibility, you risk introducing massive, opaque biases from its training data.
Yeah, it's a huge unresolved question in the text. But assuming the residual state can solve that jurisprudence problem, we have to look at how this minimalist referee is actually funded.
Which leads us to the author's startling predictions about taxation.
If the government is hyper-automated and astronomically smaller, it obviously doesn't need nearly as much money to run.
The author is projecting a scenario where high-velocity AI productivity generates explosive GDP growth.
While the cost of running the government simultaneously approaches its own lower bound.
Right. So the text argues that the resulting tax burden as a percentage of economic output would plummet. It would make even the most aggressive historical low-tax eras look burdensome.
The mechanics of this rely heavily on what the text calls dynamic scoring and the Laffer curve.
Let's break that down. In standard economic models, if you cut taxes, you assume a relative loss in revenue, maybe offset slightly by increased economic activity.
But the author argues that in an AI-driven economy, dynamic scoring becomes extreme. Each percentage point of automation-driven expansion compounds exponentially.
And regarding the Laffer curve, the peak revenue maximizing rate shifts dramatically upward with growth.
But the needed revenue baseline drops to the floor, so the economy is compounding so rapidly, generating such immense absolute wealth, that a microscopic tax rate easily funds the residual state.
The text suggests that the entire apparatus of income and corporate taxation could just be abandoned.
Good riddance, honestly. It's incredibly invasive and requires massive compliance infrastructure.
The author proposes alternative revenue models for this wealthy society, shifting to capture value from inelastic or communal assets.
Like land value taxes, congestion fees, or voluntary mechanisms.
To relate this to the listener, think about your neighborhood homeowners association.
Ah, that's a great analogy. Let's walk through that.
Right now, HOA dues are high because you have to pay for human labor. Landscaping, security, pool maintenance.
But what if solar-powered robots did all that for free?
Exactly. The HOA dues wouldn't just drop. The very concept of why you pay them would change. You'd basically just be covering the insurance on the underlying land.
You transition from taxing human labor and productivity, which you want to encourage, to taxing the friction points of the physical world.
If energy and labor are practically free, prime physical locations and bandwidth are the only truly scarce assets left.
But what about wealth distribution? The author addresses the inevitable political friction, right? The demand for punitive redistribution.
Yes. If an oligopoly of tech companies owns all the AI capital, the political pressure to tax their wealth heavily will be immense.
But the text argues this pressure drops if the wealth from AI capital is broadly distributed.
Through pensions, sovereign funds, or market mechanisms.
Because if the baseline cost of living is literally zero, the visceral anger that drives wealth tax populism just loses its kinetic energy.
That assumption, however, rests on a very precarious timeline, which brings us to the most difficult part of the essay, transition management.
Yeah, this all sounds incredibly utopian eventually, but what about the people losing their jobs right now? The author addresses these critics head on.
The essay acknowledges the immediate threat of massive labor displacement and widening inequality during the interim period.
The time between now and when absolute abundance is actually achieved.
To defend the transition, the author leans heavily on historical macroeconomic shifts.
Right. Using history to defend the future, they bring up agricultural mechanization.
The standard economic argument. Tractors destroyed millions of farming jobs, but it freed up human capital to migrate to the cities and power the Industrial Revolution.
Ultimately raising the standard of living for everyone. And the text also points to the information age, noting that computing destroyed armies of clerical workers but created entirely unforeseen professions.
The core thesis the author drives at here is crucial. The policy challenge is transition management, not permanent large government.
They are explicitly warning against building a permanent, sprawling welfare bureaucracy just to handle a temporary structural adjustment.
But I have to challenge the historical parallel here.
I completely agree. The flaw is the variable of velocity.
Exactly. The transition from farming to factory work was brutal, and it took generations.
Human capital displaced by tractors had decades to physically relocate and retrain. But as the text stated earlier, AI engages in continuous 247 self-improvement.
The velocity of capital adaptation is now infinitely faster than the velocity of human retraining.
So does humanity actually have the time to adapt and find these unforeseen professions before the AI just learns to do those too?
That's where the lump of labor fallacy breaks down. Historically, human ingenuity always created new demands. But if an AI has an absolute advantage across all cognitive and physical domains,
the concept of an unforeseen profession just vanishes. If a new industry is invented on a Tuesday, the AI can optimize and dominate it by Thursday.
humans literally cannot update their wetware fast enough to stay economically competitive against self-improving code.
I want you, the listener, to really reflect on your own industry right now. Consider what transition management would look like for you personally if your role were automated tomorrow.
It might require a level of agility and societal support that a minimalist referee simply cannot provide.
If 50% of the global workforce is structurally unemployable within a decade, the residual state might not survive the political upheaval.
And that political upheaval is exactly why the author argues this technological trajectory completely scrambles modern partisanship.
Because this shift is so fundamental, it breaks our current political spectrum entirely.
This vision aligns with neither traditional left nor right platforms.
Let's unpack how it breaks the right first. Conventional conservative ideology usually focuses on shrinking the government through austerity.
Right. Cutting budgets, reducing services, dismantling welfare programs. It's a philosophy of subtraction.
And it often results in painful cuts to programs that people might still really need. But the text argues that AI shrinks the government through abundance, not austerity.
You don't shrink the state by politically defunding a program. You shrink it because the market, supercharged by AI, provides those core needs so cheaply that the government program becomes completely unnecessary.
It's obsolescence through absolute market victory. Everyone already has what they need, so the government agency just dries up.
Conversely, the text demonstrates how this violently disrupts the political left.
Progressive instincts typically address societal friction by expanding administrative centralization.
Creating a new agency, drafting complex regulations, expanding top-down control.
But the author claims that in an environment defined by hyper-complex AI networks, centralized control becomes dangerously incompetent.
And less necessary. A decentralized web of AI agents and smart contracts can optimize resource allocation infinitely faster than a centralized bureaucracy.
The progressive instinct to administer from the top down is rendered mathematically inferior to decentralized intelligence.
Just a quick impartiality check-in here for the listener. We are examining this purely as a philosophical argument presented by the author.
Right. We are just showing how technology might dissolve the foundational assumptions of both political sides, according to this text.
And the author, despite the optimistic tone in parts, isn't entirely a blind optimist. They dedicate a significant section to the dangers of the transition.
There are some incredibly dark paths this transition could take if it's governed poorly.
The author lists very specific prerequisites for positive implementation: clear property rights, open innovation, and a fierce resistance to regulatory capture.
Let's talk about regulatory capture in this context because it's a huge risk. It's when incumbent technology monopolies lobby for complex regulations.
Often under the guise of AI safety.
Exactly. The stated goal is protecting the public, but the actual economic effect is building a massive moat to lock out open source competition.
It entrenches the incumbents.
It's like a group of early automobile makers convincing the government to ban airplanes just so they can keep selling cars. It slows progress to protect old monopolies.
And if the transition is captured by these monopolies, the nightmare scenarios are severe.
The text specifically warns about surveillance states, AI monopolies enforced by the government, and weaponized regulation.
If you build an infrastructure capable of perfectly monitoring environmental compliance,
You've also built a system capable of perfectly monitoring every physical movement and digital transaction of every citizen.
a tool capable of perfectly monitoring industries could easily become a tool of absolute oppression if it's not checked.
But despite these existential risks, the author ultimately believes the direction of the gradient is positive.
The text states that the technological gradient pulls toward efficiency and smaller coercive institutions.
The belief is that open networks and the raw physics of distributed computation will ultimately overwhelm any localized attempts at monopolistic control.
Which brings us to the ultimate destination, the final philosophical question of the essay.
If we successfully navigate the transition, and we avoid the surveillance state, and we reach this post-scarcity reality, what do humans actually do all day?
The text revisits the core claim that all our political battles assume fixed scarcity and human limitations.
And technology dissolves those assumptions.
So the author forecasts a resulting society featuring unprecedented individual autonomy and voluntary cooperation.
Because the machinery of compulsion and redistribution has completely atrophied.
The author emphasizes that we will pivot to higher pursuits, specifically exploration, science, and art.
But I have to ask, if the machinery of compulsion atrophies, what becomes the glue that holds society together?
Is a shared pursuit of art and science enough to bind a global civilization?
It's a profound question. Let's briefly recap the journey we've taken on this deep dive.
We moved from the burden of scarcity and the massive rationing board of the state.
To the promise of zero marginal cost abundance, driven by autonomous robotics.
We explored the automation of the bureaucratic state, replacing administration with simulation.
And the shift to a minimalist referee government funded by entirely new tax paradigms.
Finally, we looked at a future that completely breaks modern partisanship.
And I want to remind you, the listener, of the author's concluding thought. This essay is not a prescription for any political party. It's a forecast.
As the author says, no ideology owns this future. Reality delivers it.
I want to leave you with a final, lingering question to mull over on your own. The text suggests that when basic needs are met at zero cost, we will naturally elevate ourselves to higher pursuits.
Science, art, and exploration.
But look at human nature today. If an AI handles every chore, every tax form, and every material need, will we truly become a society of artists and explorers charting the stars?
Or without the friction of scarcity to push against, do we risk losing the very drive that made us invent the AI in the first place?
Think about what you would do tomorrow if you never had to earn another dollar. And ask yourself, is that version of you an explorer or just a very comfortable passenger?
It's something we all need to deeply consider.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the forces shaping your future.